Morning everyone, and welcome to this morning's Transport Committee. It's been another busy couple of months since we last met, and I would like to open the meeting by giving thanks to all those that have been helping manage the response to COVID-19, from transport operators, frontline workers, ward members, elected members, my colleagues at the Combined Authority. Next week is another important week in the world of transport, with a further opening up of the economy. It's important now more than ever to work closely with our transport colleagues to ensure a smooth running of services for customers. It's also a crucial time for active travel. It is encouraging to see greater uptake of active travel, which has been reflected in the results of the Combined Authority's COVID-19 Transport Survey. The survey revealed that 39% of respondents are currently walking and running more than before lockdown, and 35% increase in cycling more often than before lockdown. These increased levels of active travel are encouraging, and we should take advantage of the renewing interest in these forms of travel, which will be of great importance if we are to achieve our net zero carbon targets. We also await further information around the prioritisation of the schemes that have been put forward, and thanks again to districts for submitting those under the emergency active travel funding. I'm also happy to report that several of the Transforming City schemes are progressing well through the development stage. The recruitment has been successful of our officers to help assist with Transforming Cities, which has to be delivered within a 2 years phase. So thank you once again for your ongoing support. So I'm going to actually go straight into the agenda and hand over to Ben Kearns to see if we've got any pecuniary interests. Ben.
Hi. We had, I think it was before the live stream started, so I'd just like to say we've had apologies from Simon Pringle. So I don't know, I'm not aware of any disclosable pecuniary interests. If anyone's got any, could you let me know? And there are no items on the agenda that require the exemption of the press or the public. So I'll hand back to Councillor Groves for the minutes.
Thank you, Ben. Everybody has got their mics on mute. If you need to speak, either if you can raise your hand or use the chat, I'll try and, obviously we've got a lot of people in the meeting. I will try and make sure that we have. Okay, right. I will now move swiftly to the minutes of the meeting of the Transport Committee held on the 15th of March. So I am taking it that everybody's read their papers. So I'm looking for...
Kevin Swift's got his hand up.
Yes, I know, but I haven't finished speaking. So we'll move swiftly to those. So questions and comments, and indeed, Councillor Swift.
It's just belated apologies for not having been at the last meeting. I managed to successfully access the group meeting before the full meeting, and then couldn't actually access the full transport meeting at all. So my apologies for not having been with you during the course of the last meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Swift. I've got Councillor Buckley.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just following on from what Councillor Swift said there, and this is nothing to do with officers at WYCA or you, Chair, but to highlight this ongoing situation with technology, I'm sitting here with a laptop, a desktop and a mobile phone, and I've been on the mobile phone to our office for an hour and a quarter, trying to get into the Conservative meeting and then into this meeting. And the sooner we get back to face-to-face meetings, the better. That's all I wanted to say, Chair, but the situation is getting quite silly.
Thank you for raising that, Councillor Booker. I apologise. I do believe there's been a number of technical problems this morning. So thank you for your comments. In terms of the agenda, I'm going to have to switch it round because we have got Matt Rice joining us from Network Rail this morning. So Matt's time it's constrained, so we're just going to move straight to the rail strategy. And the purpose of this report, which I'm sure everybody's read, is to update members on several related strategic rail items. Obviously, the West Yorkshire Rail Vision, which I thank you all for being part of and helping shape that vision with our officers. Matt is going to comment on the strategic modular planning. We never get easy titles in rail for some reason. And the paper really speaks to the delivery of the major projects of HS2, MPR, and Transpennine upgrade, electrification of the Calder Valley. So quite a detailed paper and most welcome. And I'm going to hand over to Matt.
Thank you, Chair. People will shout if they can't hear me. So thank you for the invite to talk. I'm mindful of the time. My son is doing his best to join the meeting. If you can hear him, I have to apologise. I can't shut him up yet. I'll go and do that after I've spoken to you. Look, colleagues on the call, I think potentially I can see Liz and others will have had some insight into what I'm going to say. So I'll try and keep it relatively sensible in terms of detail on content. But I'm minded to just thank Councillor Buckley for his encouragement to get people moving out of the house at some point. It's a weird place to be in the railway where we're running lots of trains, encouraging people not to use them, and then trying to talk about how we grow them in the future. Whilst before COVID, it was difficult to work out what growth would be like. Post-COVID, it's going to be even more difficult potentially. But we are positive that we can respond in whichever way local authorities, combined authorities, and government needs us to. So look, we in the run-up, that all things before COVID, Network Rail has an obligation to make sure that it has some view as to what the railway needs to do in the future. I've talked to members, I think, and certainly officers about the challenges we have with that in terms of satisfying what we think are quite a broad set of stakeholder growth plans or growth aspirations with what a railway can do. Never is that more acute than places like West Yorkshire, with particularly, and I won't apologise from a railway point of view, Leeds being at the epicentre of your combined authority, but it is so strategically important, and from a network point of view, that many roads and rail do, if you pardon the pun, do radiate out from Leeds. So focusing on it isn't because we don't think other parts of the combined authority are less important. It just from a systems planning point of view, if we get Leeds right, everyone else benefits almost by default. So please accept that as a sort of a motive for probably talking about Leeds more than anything else for today. Offline, happy to take any specific questions people might have. So we, alongside members, as Councillor Grove said, Network Rail run a process called Continuous Modular Strategic Planning. Think of it as a long-term rail plan in simple terms. We will rebrand it, I'm sure, where we work with stakeholders to understand what your economic and societal plans are, try and map that to how the railway needs to grow to enable it, as well as trying to combine that with plans from other parts of the country. So again, Leeds gets trains from Scotland and the Southwest. And as well as also working alongside the DFT to make sure we're in line with what national government thinks the railway should be doing. We focused our ask on how forecast growth and partners' aspirations needed to be accommodated at Leeds up to and included 2043. There were three broad growth forecasts we looked to use. One using the DFT, which is suitably conservative, and one using our own view alongside WYCA, which I still think is probably the most reasonable, even with COVID, which probably saw growth at Leeds somewhere in the 50 to 60% by 2043, above where we are at the moment. And then we did also do some work to make sure we had an eye to TFN's transformational growth, which is much closer to the 80 to 90% bracket. But we were minded to come up again with our medium scale growth again, which is with WYCA, such that we had a baseline that we felt reflected the reality we understand, but without doing any harm or detriment to the TFN cause, which is a north of England resident I'm clearly supportive of. probably those of you who've had anything to do with trains, either by dealing with constituents' complaints about them since May 18 or travelling them on yourselves, will know that we have a growth challenge. Certainly pre-COVID, we have a growth challenge in the north of England, which again leads in the West Yorkshire areas in terms of up to Bradford, Huddersfield, Harrogate, etc. Or on the way up to Harrogate, certainly, if not including, are difficult to deliver on. That if I using a simple scenario which you're seeing yourself, sadly the people who aren't travelling on the trains are missing out on record levels of performance. So even as we've started to move quite a high volume of trains through the network at the moment, yesterday we finished the day with sort of 98% of trains running on time. Now I can only dream of that being the case back in January. So we do have a disconnect between the level of people trying to get on and off trains, the level of trains we're trying to run, and our ability to run them on time. That's our problem. It's a great problem to have. We've got to make sure we don't miss the learning that we've been picking up over the last few months as to how to make the system work better. But when we looked at Leeds over the next 20 years, that growth challenge, which is a great one to have, is only going to increase, and Leeds Station, its surroundings, needs to be able to accommodate that growth. The work found we got constraints across the platforms at Leeds, unsurprisingly. The approaches to Leeds in terms of the railway coming in from all four quadrants is at capacity. In terms of capacity now for us to reliably deliver a high-performing railway, as you will all know, but very soon we'll be, in the next 2 to 3 years, we'll be at technical capacity where there physically isn't any more space to put trains on, even if we were delivering them all absolutely on time. In addition to that, the platform lengths across the West Yorkshire Combined Authority is an issue. So the lengths of platforms might be fine at Leeds, but getting on the radial routes, getting longer 3-car, 6-car trains, particularly for Northern, is not possible currently. So we're going to have to get on and build if we want a holistic network to work and capacity to be available. There's no, again, it's probably just be really clear with people. One of the ways we can continue with high level performance is to run fewer trains, but longer ones. So you still provide the seats, you still provide the passenger capacity, but the frequency is reduced. So there is a live debate we all need to engage on in terms of the merits of what is it better to provide 1 an hour reliably where everyone gets a seat, or 2 an hour unreliably, even though people still get seats. Clearly, we'd like to do 2 an hour in this example and give everyone a seat, but we've got an opportunity to, certainly in the short term, make some changes where passengers will benefit from reliability that they've probably forgotten is possible, frankly. So lots of obvious areas where West Yorkshire's rail infrastructure doesn't satisfy the demand and isn't big enough to deal with the demand required by passengers, probably currently, but more importantly, in the next 15 to 20 years, if the growth forecasts are to be realised. Probably worth a quick note, the work did factor in the HS2 requirements and MPR requirements. So again, it didn't directly seek to duplicate any of the work that those work streams are undertaking, but it did understand the requirements for longer platforms, for instance, for MPR, to understand the flow of traffic across the Pennines in through Leeds. So that's all been factored in. And I think, I guess to rattle to a summary, Chair, and again, I'm happy to take questions, and I'm probably breaching some sort of government confidence here, but I was on the North of England DFT chaired program board on Thursday. They have endorsed further funding to keep this study going, to move towards a decision to develop. So that's where government put money forward for us to work with stakeholders to start getting into the design phase of what I talk about platforms being needed. You've got to design them, you've got to do the relevant signalling chains, etc. Regretfully, that takes a bit of money and takes a bit of time, but the department have supported that without really, frankly, the paper sailed through. There is no one out there denying the need for significant development investment, if not delivery investment in Leeds. We're seeing that at Platform Zero in terms of the delivery. We need to get on board as quickly as possible. So combination of that paper, hopefully the government speeding up some of the overall authority to get on and deliver that we're working with them on, should see further investment flowing through Leeds, all things being equal when we start to come out of COVID and whatever that means in terms of rail demand. So, Chair, I probably don't intend, I've got some slides that we can circulate to the meeting after this where there's a bit more detail. I'm happy to try and take questions with the just with the exception, if it gets into a bit of, if I can't give you the absolute right answer with confidence, I'll take it away and come back to you.
Thank you, Matt. So questions and comments. I'm looking on the chat to see if anybody's put any questions or comments. Councillor Ball.
Thanks, Chair. Yep. Thanks for that presentation, Matt. A couple of points for comment and clarification. Transpennine route upgrade is obviously mentioned here, and there's a certain amount of discontent in Kirklees from one end to the other. My colleagues and rail users in the Colne Valley are concerned and upset that on the basis that TRU would sort out disabled access at stations, Marsden and other stations along the route have been excluded from access for all funding. It now seems that they are not going to get that step-free access as part of TRU, and so they're wanting to know, what's going to be done to make their stations disability friendly. They're also concerned that apparently they have seen a letter from Network Rail dated September 2018, which indicated severe disruption to communities including Marsden and Slough over a 5-year construction period. Is that still a valid assumption? Obviously, my own area of Murfield, we're disappointed that TRU is not delivering a new rail station. It's still delivering something which, for one of the busiest stations in the area and the only one in Kirklees currently with a direct link to London, is very substandard. The Northern Powerhouse rail is also mentioned in the report, and I don't know whether Peter and the cabinet.
Sorry, I'm just on a call, so forgive the background noise. How can I help?
Sorry, somebody's voice was
I'm
coming.
I'm pretty chocker for a lot of the day, so if it's a quick one, then probably now.
Voice
Otherwise, a chat, and then maybe later on.
Somebody's voice is coming through.
Patrick, are you on mute? I think he's on mute now. Councillor Bolt, continue, please.
Thanks very much. Northern Powerhouse Rail. Again, that's mentioned about the aspirations, and I think I'd appreciate some clarity on the terminology, because it talks about a central Bradford station, but then we've got the Southern Gateway. Geographically, the two would seem to be far apart. Is it a parkway gateway to the south of the city, or is it the centre? And I don't know if any work has been done on understanding the impact of NPR on Kirklees and other places which wouldn't benefit from it, because if that's seen to be taking a volume of transport and trade, then it may negatively impact on Kirklees. And I don't know if there's been any studies done on that, Matt. Thank you.
Matt, so if you want to take the questions that relate to Network Rail, then I'm going to ask Liz Hunter to come in and take the questions in connection to NPR.
Thank you, Chair. So, Councillor Bolt, appreciate the questions. There's probably, I am going to commit to come back to you, because there's a detail that I'm not going to try and wing, for want of a better term, on the local stations, but there's certainly some stuff we can do together. So there's two things, I think, subject, with the exception of NPR we talked about. There's just the general accessibility, almost forget TRU for the moment, if I may, across stations on the Transpennine core route. And it is true to say, as far as I'm aware, that they are outside of the TRU scope as currently drafted, although that scope is very much still a work in progress with the department. But that doesn't preclude you and I and any other members on here of discussing how we, as a railway route through your corridor, can seek other funding, work together with my minor renewals teams to see what we can do. It might preclude massively big accessible footbridges, but I'm sure we can engage together on coming up with a plan that is separate from TRU. I think in terms of, I've touched on it, the general approach for TRU, it is very much in that, as I understand it, the latter stages of the government deciding exactly what the next phase of development for that project will be. Again, I don't have any further information I can share on it at the moment, but I would expect that we get an announcement relatively soon. And again, always happy to pick up any specifics that might be relevant as far as I'm able. I am starting to get more involved in TRU, which to an extent that I haven't been up until probably January this year. So I appreciate that's probably not the answers. Well, it's not answers to your question directly. I'm happy to note, or for the minutes to note, that I commit to come back to or have a session with Councillor Bolt to go through the local issues and come up with a what I think would be beneficial, which is a plan that's probably agnostic of TRU. My personal view is that TRU will be a really good thing for the overall region, but there will be areas that it simply doesn't touch. So if we tackle those locally, we might have a bit more success if we break them down in a more manageable fashion. And that will be a good test of Network Rail's ability to do what we've done in terms of evolve and be more locally accessible.
Thank you, Matt. Liz, do you want to come in? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I suppose just the first point to reiterate is the importance of both TRU and NPR. They do very different things, and I think that's what we're trying to be explicit in the paper, that we need TRU to be delivered as quickly as possible to deliver the benefits, as I think Councillor Bolt you've set out. So we're really keen to make sure that TRU carries on whilst we continue the work on NPR. On NPR, you mentioned the Bradford Gateway. So what Bradford Council are looking at is the development opportunity that is to the south of the existing city centre, and they're looking at that as a kind of Southern Gateway area to understand how NPR could help transform the connectivity to Bradford, and therefore the potential around wherever a new station might be. In terms of new station locations, they're all still being worked through. No decisions have been made, and there is, I think, what Transport for the North are looking at is, as you would imagine at this stage, because it's really early stages of development, they're still at strategic outline case stage. They are looking at different options for where that station could be. And as we've mentioned before, I think we're also interested in the relationship between NPR and the Calder Valley line in that area. So no decisions have been taken. The Southern Gateway is an area of Bradford that Bradford colleagues are looking at to see how NPR can help transform it. In terms of impact on Kirklees, again, the work that TfN are doing looks at both what NPR will deliver and then what that means for the existing network, and again, really early stages of the work, and maybe NPR is a conversation that we can kind of come back to, Chair, if we may, at a future meeting when we know more about some of the various different options and how they relate to the different areas.
Thank you, Liz. I've got Councillor Scullion.
Thank you, Chair. We would also, I think, in Calderdale appreciate more detailed conversation later with Matt in terms of the TRU. I guess we have to get used to thinking about the longer term legacy. COVID-19 is just absolutely absorbing all our time and attention, but nonetheless, looking forward in terms of legacy of where we will be at that point. And we know that in terms of the Transpennine update, it will actually mean disruption on the Calder Valley line. But we're very much hoping that those extra trains, the learning from that, etc., that will actually provide a legacy for the Calder Valley line going forward. And that's what we would want to really push. And I guess the other thing to say is the reference to electrification at 2.14 in the paper, something we long for with all our hearts in the Calder Valley line. I just wanted to add, though, that actually we have had, with Network Rail, really a very extensive programme of platform lengthening in order to take the longer trains. And actually Network Rail have done a very good job in terms of the working at night, communicating with residents by and large, and actually has been relatively painless as far as these infrastructure projects are. So really we do need to get on with that in terms of improving the overall system. Thank you, Chair.
Chair, if I may, just one point, because I think that there's two. I didn't respond to Councillor Bolt on the same issue of the disruption fear, I think, or concern. It would be remiss of me if we're going to spend billions of pounds on this corridor in what is a fairly up and down fairly weather dependent part of the country. There's going to be some disruption, and exactly how long that is for and the impact that has is still being worked through, and it's probably at the heart of why TRU has taken so long to get off the ground, because there is no obvious easy solution. All I can genuinely give you a public reassurance on is that we are putting in place. So historically, what the railway will often do is design a project through the eyes of the engineers, layer it onto the railway, and then move passengers around it. What my team, including Toby, who's on this call, are doing, as far as we can, without absolutely blowing the cost envelope, it will be to work with Northern and TPE particularly to say, right, how do we keep passengers going such that they still want to come back to the railway when it's finished? And how do we make sure that the diversion routes, the people who live by the railway who never use it, are all going to see this as a broadly positive thing, and still be able to look them in the eye and say, really sorry, this weekend might be a bit disruptive, but in the long term, it's a fair trade. And I think too often, whilst I'll note that we did okay in the sort of recent months, too often that isn't a given, and Toby spends too much of his time having to make peace. So it is very much at the core of what we're thinking. The proof will be in the pudding over the next few months, but again, I think getting the right local dialogue and making sure you've got started the right local plans, not just TRU, but the other work that we'll be doing all the time anyway, is going to be a key component of us working successfully together.
Thank you. Thank you. I've got a question from Councillor Swift. He wants to know if there's anything new to say about Platform 17. I think we've had many conversations about Platform 17, and it is in the Strategic Modular Plan, I believe.
It's on the list, certainly. If the question is where is it, so the option to extend it is on the list of things that we are examining based as part of the decision of the funding that the DfT have just given us. We know we've got constraints in terms of the gate line issues there. Sorry, not the gate line, the circulation issues that Platform 17 gives, but also its its length means that trains coming to and from it causes problems with stations on the routes it serves. So all I can say again, we've recognised that we need to investigate the value for money case for extending it, basically.
Okay. Matt, could I just ask, in terms of Leeds Station, Richard George did actually say in the first report that came out that actually Neville Hill needed to be a complete reconstruction of Neville Hill. That seems to have gone really quiet. We're not hearing anything about that. And then secondly, on TRU, our network, they're at a stage where you're going to work with Councillor Matt Bride on where you would be locating yourself once the button is pushed on TRU. Have you been looking at sites?
So I'll take the first one, Councillor Groves, if I may, and then we'll come on to the location piece. So Neville Hill has, sorry that it seems like it's gone quiet publicly. Alongside, we've used the change in Northern's ownership to pick that debate up with anger. I think I have circa £4 to £6 million worth of renewals money that we'll be putting into Neville Hill. But I'm currently working with LNER, Northern, East Midlands to an extent, because they come up to that part of the world, to put together a far more ambitious whole capital overhaul, which will likely, I've told people like Sam Corey at the DfT that we're likely to be coming to them with a request for something that's closer to 40 to 50 million, maybe, rather than the 4 to 5 we're spending to overhaul the complete site. That's with me and my team at the moment. There is a lot more to go before any of that becomes fact. But I just please be assured that Richard George was right, and we now need to do the right thing long term, linking in with TRU, any requirements NPR has. So, and that's about getting the balance. Not waiting for what 2043 needs to be, getting on with it now, and incrementally building up the capability of Neville Hill. It's a big employer in the area. It's a big trade. We're trying to look at it as a new training centre. So perhaps what we'll do, Councillor Grove, is just pull together in the next. I probably need a few weeks to get it mature enough, but get together a bit of an info pack on where we are with Neville Hill, just so you've got it and so you can see what we are still trying to do with the depot. And then on the TRU, just so I'm clear on the question, you talked about locating. I'm not sure I know exactly how to answer it. Could you just be clear on the question for me?
Yeah, so in terms of when you're working on Platform 0, you've obviously got a location and a site, and you knew where you were going to be based. I'm just trying to establish how far down the line network rail are with TRU and conversations with government, and you'd have to find a location, and that may cause disruption and displacement, and just wanting to understand a little bit more about TRU.
So do you mean in terms of like construction staff?
Yes.
I'm going to need to come back to you on that one, simply because I don't have the construction plan in front of me. There's probably there are parts on the network where small compounds have started to be built, or just to allow for better direct access. But the likelihood is there'll be quite a transient picture over the 4 to 5 years of the construction as we move along the route. So let me see what I can get you in terms of indicative construction plans, bearing in mind that we've got to be clear that where the scope is fixed or isn't. So I think that might be an emerging Q&A, if I may. I don't think there's an absolute answer now, but it's a fair one. In terms of, I guess, there is the footnote to that, which is a good, I think, for employment, that with these projects comes lots of people who sit in offices and do engineering design, safety management, operations management, including my team. I think I mentioned before, we've taken up some space in the middle of Leeds at Platform. The TRU team already currently occupy a whole floor in that building. So I would suspect that in terms of subject to what COVID does to the way the workforce behaves, the plan before COVID would very much to have seen the employment base at Leeds particularly probably grow, and would have impacted with site offices elsewhere along the route, as we said. So in many ways, it's good news as long as we get the relationship with our neighbours correct.
Okay. Councillor Swift, did you want to come in? No. I think we might be having.
Sorry, Chair. Just unmuting myself. It was really a supplementary to Matt's answer about Platform 17. And earlier in the year, Matt made it clear to us, quite understandably, that extending the notorious Platform 17 was far from straightforward. Now, if we're in a situation, as I would expect, that doing anything about Platform 17 itself is actually quite some years into the future, then do we have any salvation to our problem of needing slightly longer trains on the routes that go to, Castleford, Wakefield, Kirkgate and Barnsley? Is there any prospect of us getting salvation in terms of our trains being accommodated somewhere else on Leeds Station? Or are we condemned to another decade of the current capacity problems?
Hopefully not condemned to another decade. I've touched on at the beginning, Councillor Swift, that we are the time is we're faced with an opportunity now where we can, alongside train operating colleagues, have a structural look at the timetable that we were running before COVID. So if we end up running fewer trains but longer trains, we might find it presents an opportunity to move trains around at Leeds Station. The rail industry can relatively quickly put in place technology that allows selected door opening, but again, it's not super straightforward. But there are options. So, look, I think the industry's focused very much on getting the timetable uplift that's coming on Monday in good order. We then look to September, and we need to work with Northern and TPE particularly to understand what the right long-term choice is in terms of putting train services back in. As we do that, we might find that we've got choices that we didn't see available to us when we said 17 was needed. That feels, again, I appreciate that's a bit of a generalist statement, but I think on the specifics, let me take that away and have a chat with Rob Warnes at Northern and see whether there is some imagination we can put to this without the constraints that perhaps we would have done 3 or 4 months ago.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Matt.
No problem.
Councillor Buckley.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to go back to something that was said a few minutes ago. There's obviously a tremendous amount of hard work going on and all sorts of planning and so on. But I just wondered, what is the answer to the overall situation at the moment, whereby we know that capacity is now gone up. And of course, reference was made to punctuality being very, very high indeed. But of course, there aren't any passengers. Passenger numbers are down about 85%. And I don't know whether you want to call this stress testing or not, but work must surely have been taking place about how many passengers we actually think are going to be on the rail network in 5, 6, 7 years' time? Because surely since the COVID situation, the world is a very different place. And there must surely be a different thought now on what overall numbers are likely to be. And will this not affect all these plans?
Okay. So again, that may be something that broader than just Network Rail, given what drives passenger numbers. So just to make the point, Leeds Station pre-COVID saw 90,000 people a day, roughly, on average. That dropped down to about 3.5 at its lowest, and it's climbed up to about 15,000 or so at the moment. I think from a rail perspective answer, actually we aren't that far advanced in trying to forecast exactly what COVID's done to growth. And I may be corrected, but I suspect forecasting that in any quadrant of government or society is actually quite difficult at the moment. So from our point of view, Councillor Buckley, we're assuming there will be a return to growth, and we're carrying on with that basis. And I think that's reinforced by the fact that the conversations we're in government are still committed to getting things like TRU developed, funded, and built. What we've got to, I guess, the reality is the railway system was creaking at the seams anyway. So perversely, we may not be too disappointed if there is a small drop off. I think the question we want to ask ourselves is how financially viable are we if capacity or passenger usage drops too far? That's where it becomes a problem. We're a heavily subsidised industry anyway in many quadrants. And what we need to work out is we Network Rail are focused on being cost effective, making sure we're being as prudent as possible with taxpayers' money in terms of the work we're doing. And therefore, regardless of what growth scenario comes out, hopefully we'll still be a viable entity to allow people to travel in a way that is still far more environmentally friendly anyway than car travel, which is probably the go-to for many people currently.
Yeah, and we're obviously progressing a transport recovery plan, but I'm going to bring James Nutter in at this point, who's leading on our rail vision for West Yorkshire.
Yeah, hi. Good morning, everyone. I was just going to sort of respond on that particular issue. We have seen over a number of years now a lot of suppressed demand for rail travel in West Yorkshire. So when you think about that and think about the objectives to achieve a zero carbon economy by 2038, actually, in the long run, we think that there could well be a return to the sort of high levels of demand and hopefully more, which we still need to plan for and still need to build for. It just might be that it's used in a slightly different way, and that people maybe don't do the sort of 5 days a week commuting, but either do 3 days, but then you have more of them making trips for different reasons. So I think Matt's absolutely right. There's still lots to learn about the impacts of COVID, but it's the railway is still central to our overall objectives, I think. So.
Okay. Any more questions or comments before we move to the recommendations? Okay, just checking. Councillor Caffrey, were you wanting to come in there? No. I think Councillor Caffrey is on mute. Councillor Caffrey, were you wanting to come in?
No, I was just flicking the screen. Sorry about
All right. Okay. Matt, thank you as always for your time and the update and all the work that you're doing and the partnership offers that you've made to meet with Calderdale and Kirklees. We will, I'm sure that the committee want to continue to support Network Rail, especially around the Leeds Station existing programme and the funding case for the project partnership between Network Rail, Leeds Council and Transport for the North. We obviously welcome the publication of the Leeds Area Continuous Modular Strategic Planning Study by Network Rail. It gives us a lot to think about. And again, we will, I'm sure that the committee want to actively support that, again, with Network Rail and Transport for the North. I'd like to ask the committee to endorse the recommendations, which also includes the authority's submission for the new stations fund, which, to remind everybody, is White Rose and Fort Park Station. And for the committee to note, which obviously they've been involved in it, the West Yorkshire Rail Vision, and endorse to move to the next steps. If there's anyone who is against any of that, could you just put that in the chat? Otherwise, I will take that that we are endorsing all the recommendations. Okay, thank you. Matt, you're free to leave us now, but thank you for your time and for Toby's time. Thank you.
See you later. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye. Right, we will move on to the next item for discussion, which is, and we do, sorry, I just need to get to approve the minutes. Apologies, I did forget to do that at that stage. So again, if anybody has got any problems with endorsing the minutes, can you put that into the chat, please? Right, I'm seeing no comments there, so the minutes are accepted. So we now move on to item 5, which is the governance arrangements for 2020-21. The Transport Committee, obviously, like councils, we did not have an AGM. So the appointments will continue. Myself as chair, Councillor Korshik as deputy chair, Councillor Bolt as leader of the opposition for Transport Committee, to re-establish the district subcommittees and make appointments of the district chairs of those committees. So the appointments are Councillor Tash Salam from Bradford, Councillor Daniel Sutherland from Calderdale, Councillor James Homewood from Kirklees, Councillor Peter Carhill from Leeds, and Councillor Swift from Wakefield. We need to approve the reappointment of the public representatives who attend the district committees. They've all been written to, and I'll just go over to Ben. I believe everybody has accepted, and their term of office will be exactly a year until we move to a mayoral authority. Ben, have we got the confirmation on the acceptance of the public?
Yes, that's right. Everyone's been contacted. A few have chosen to stand down, but the majority are happy to extend for another year.
Okay. So the recommendations are that we approve the reappointments of the public representatives, agree with each district consultation subcommittees on the dates set out in the paper. There are 3 other things that we need to re-establish. The local bus working group, I'm sure, in terms of the COVID response, and as we move to a devolution deal, which gives us more opportunities around local bus services, that this group is crucial to be set up, and also that the group will work on and feed back to the Transport Committee, but more importantly, feed into the Economic Recovery Board at WYCA. So that's a local bus services working group for a year of 2021. Re-establish the cycling and walking working group 2021, and re-establish the zero emissions transport working group for 2021. Is everybody happy to move those recommendations? Any questions or comments? I think I've got one. Martin Bolt would like to speak. Councillor Bolt would like to speak. There you go, Councillor Bolt.
Thanks, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Oh, yes.
I wasn't sure if the microphone had just gone. In line with national terminology, could I suggest that the cycling and walking working group is renamed the active travel working group? Then it dovetails in, and obviously as we talk about e-scooters and everything will be encompassed in that. Obviously all the money's coming out now under active travel, and I think it'd work nice if we just called it that.
I'm personally happy to accept that recommendation. Anyone against that recommendation? No? Okay, then can we agree the recommendation and the appointments? Thank you. So we will move to item 6, which is the COVID impacts and the recovery. And I'm going to hand over to our Director of Transport, Dave Pearson to introduce the item.
Okay, thank you, Chair. This is a fairly long paper in terms of firstly updating you all as to where we are and what things have changed since the last time we discussed this at the previous meeting, as well as identifying a number of issues for consideration. So I'll pick out a couple of things on the paper, and obviously happy to clarify and to discuss any aspects of it. But I think if we one of the key things that we have at the moment is quite a lot of uncertainty around the funding position for bus in particular. We have a funding arrangement from government which at this moment in time as we speak ends at the beginning of August, and that's leading quite a lot of uncertainty both for local transport authorities like ourselves, but also for bus operators and for the public generally. So I think one of the things we're pushing very strongly for is some clarity on how the funding provision operates over the coming months, so that we can plan accordingly in terms of the bus services. As has been pointed out in the conversation about rail, clearly the fact that buses are carrying 20 to 25% of the normal numbers of people that they would carry means that they're only essentially drawing in about a quarter or less than that of the fare revenue that they would be generating, and that the public sector is essentially making up the difference in terms of the running costs, and that we do need some sort of certainty and a way of planning for that going forward. I think one of the things that we do pick out on item 2.15 is that this leads to concerns about as we do move into the next phase of the COVID situation, the viability of bus services. If government funding is going to reduce, then we're going to have some difficult decisions to make around certain bus services. And so what we're suggesting in the report is that to manage that process, we're going to have some fairly close liaison with yourselves as members in between transport committee meetings. So what we're suggesting is we do use the local bus service working group that Councillor Groves has just mentioned as a mechanism for discussing the sort of emerging position regarding bus funding, bus services, and how we're managing that. And I would add into that, it's not in the paper, but the fact that we probably all saw yesterday that the government announced its guidance and its plans around school reopening in September, and there is a significant component around how we will manage the bus service and the school bus services to support that. And clearly there will be some financial issues and some service provision issues and some passenger safety issues which we need to work through to do that. So what we're suggesting at this meeting is really flagging these issues to you and saying when over the remainder of the summer and into the autumn and probably into the winter, we will probably need to convene that local bus service working group to deal with issues as they emerge, both passenger issues and financial issues. 2.22 onwards in the paper deals with the active travel and the funding the position and the actions that we've taken around there. And then in 2.27 onwards in the paper, what we're sharing with you and seeking your input into are the key principles around a transport recovery plan, and Councillor Groves mentioned this earlier in terms of developing a cohesive recovery plan so that we can rebuild our transport networks and rebuild our transport policies around the change into the economy and to social conditions that's emerging out of the COVID situation. So it'd be useful to get your feedback as members in terms of the key principles from 2.27 onwards. Finally, at 4.2, we've been looking at various things that we need to do to respond to the COVID situation and perhaps to to reshape some of our programs a little so that we can move fairly quickly in responding to that. One of the things we do need to do is to review the guidance which you as members have approved that we apply to what bus services the combined authority funds, and I think we need to review that in the light of the changes both to society and to the economy and to the bus service economy arising from the COVID situation. We've also got a technology-led program, and we need to refocus some aspects of that on things like providing information to customers on how full buses are on the signs that are available on the street. Bus operators apps are doing this a little at the moment, and we need to bring that information into a more wider availability. So in 4.2, we're looking to do a number of different things in response to particularly the technology aspects of the things we do. So I'll leave it there, Chair, and clearly there's a lot of issues, and both myself and Liz and Alan can address those issues and questions that members have. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. And from a chair's point of view, I just need to inform the committee that leaders have continuously tried to liaise with government with UTG to try and secure additional funding. There's no funding coming forward. We need an announcement on funding for bus before August. We're still having to pay the concessionary fares, which really have been invisible customers, and that's costing us around 3 million per month. We're getting to a really critical stage. We've gone from pre-COVID to looking towards a national bus strategy to hardly very little communication at all around funding in this really difficult time. It will get to a point that it will start to impact right across West Yorkshire in terms of services. We will have to write again to government, which I'm hoping that the committee will agree to today. Please bear in mind that we are left with the responsibility of providing school transport, and we're in July and we've only got a number of weeks to actually prepare, plan, but we need definite funding. So we're going to have to make some difficult decisions around the concessionary fare payments that we're making at this moment in time. So happy to open up to questions and comments. Councillor Caffrey?
Yeah, can I just ask a question on the, thanks Chair, on the local bus services working group? I mean, obviously we get a lot of queries about buses, and we got some last night at scrutiny. It's quite close to people's heart. I'm just wondering what the objective of this working group are, because some of the other working groups you've got kind of dedicated hardcore, but this one suggests it's anybody can turn up, anybody can take part, and anybody can chair it. And I'm not sure what the objectives of it are, or how it will function, or what the results will be, and what effect will have on the committee decisions. It doesn't seem to be a lot of structure to it, or it's difficult to have an agenda. And there's been no continuity in conversation because it's different people, or the way it's worded, different people at every meeting. So, I mean, I'd be happy to be on it because I get a lot of queries about buses, and it's something that I'd like to be involved in. But I just can't see what the structure to this group is really, and what objectives are going to come out of it.
Yeah, I think immediately we'd be looking at a transport recovery plan around bus. Working on the messages that we're all having to pick up as elected members on a probably weekly basis around passenger safety and conditions and confidence building. How we rebuild the bus network, because we have to play a big part in that for our economy. It's our main mode of transport for moving people. What developing a sustainable funding model looks like in terms of public transport. and value for the money. I mean, I've just alluded to the concessions. You know, we're paying for people that are not travelling straight to the operators at a very significant level of funding. And we are accountable for the public purse. So I can't foresee that can continue, because we either need the data to prove what we're paying for, and then enhancing our bus infrastructure. Obviously, we've got all the schemes going out from Transforming Cities. We're trying to accelerate all our schemes and working with districts on acceleration of those schemes to actually help and support the economy in jobs. So there's quite a lot of things. I'm going to hand over to Dave of the structure, but it's open to Transport Committee members.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think Councillor Caffrey makes a good point, actually. I think, and just looking back in terms of how the local bus service working group has worked in the past, it's a fair comment from Councillor Caffrey that the terms of reference for that group is fairly wide and the membership is fairly fluid, because it was always the way in which we could engage with yourselves as Transport Committee members on some of the detailed information which we get in terms of our process of tendering bus services, analysing passenger use, and analysing the viability of bus services. And we periodically have in the past convened that group to be able to share that information with you, some of which is at a fairly high level of detail, and some of which can be at times, because of it's related to a procurement process, can have a level of confidentiality within it. I think it's a good point that Councillor Caffrey makes, is that we probably just need to give a little bit more shape as to how we would see the local bus service working group operating in this COVID environment, which obviously is quite different to how the groups worked before. So that's probably something for myself and colleagues to take back, is to, if and when we do convene the working group, we'll put a little bit more shape to that in terms of how we're going to do it.
Yeah, I think the simple answer is it didn't work before, that Dave did it. So if we can't go back to that, so we need to get it right this time. Okay, any more questions, Councillor Ball? And then Councillor Ellis.
Yeah, thanks. Just picking up on what Dave said, and also Pete's point. I think, yeah, we're at the point today where we need to be looking at, as Dave called it, the shape. The recommendation is that the local bus working group oversees the reinstatement of the bus network and any commissioning of services. Now, is that purely overseeing it? In which case, it is, as it says, advisory only. Or are we expecting the group to actually make some recommendation or decision on that? The structure of the working group, with not having any quorum, and the potential that if fewer than 3 members indicate they will attend, and that, that may happen that on the day we get fewer than 3 people, then the meeting, it says, need not be held, and I think that needs to be clarified. If we don't get more than 3 people, and we are moving towards having a quorum in that case, are we saying the meeting will not take place? Again, we've heard about the importance of bus services, but if there's no member present from a district affected by bus service issues, then a recommendation may not be made, which means that the issues could be left in abeyance for a long period of time from the absence of somebody from a district. And I think, obviously, bus services cover more than one district. If we have a a bus from Huddersfield to Leeds that we're talking about, and somebody from one of those authorities is not present, it means that we can't make any decision or consideration of that according to the terms of reference. So I think, it does need some more structure, and particularly if it is to be making a decision or recommendation, and we need to be changing those terms of reference.
Thank you, Councillor Ball. I would hope that on such an important subject, and members actually been placed on this board on behalf of their authorities that we would get attendance. And I think the way we've managed it recently on cycling and walking and the rail vision has been excellent. And when there's been a decision to be made, obviously in challenging times, we've contacted the Transport Committee, we've emailed around to make sure that everybody agrees with those decisions. I think this is a challenging time, but it's an important board to support. Dave, do you want to add anything?
I think the as I said earlier, that we brought forward the terms of that group as it was before. Obviously, we're in a slightly different situation here, so it probably does require us to give a little bit more structure to how we will manage things over the coming months. And happy to take that away and respond to Councillor Bolt and Councillor Caffrey's points here. The way in which it was structured was originated when we used to do area by area reviews of bus service tenders, and then we brought that back to that group just to share what the outcome of that tendering would be. One of the things it says in the report is that we are going to look at the guidance and criteria which this committee has approved several years ago to see whether or not it's the right guidance and criteria for applying to things in the future. And we will it'd be useful to have a working group discussion around the existing criteria and what we want to how we want to change it. And I think that'd be useful to do as well. So I think what I'm taking from this conversation is that we probably just need to reflect a little bit on those terms of reference and perhaps set out a bit of a program and a bit of a methodology that we will apply to what will still be a fairly uncertain period over the coming months.
I've got Councillor Ellis and then Councillor Salam and then Councillor Swift.
Thank you, Chair. Page 18, paragraph 2.14. David, I'm getting an awful lot of inquiries about the Keighley to Halifax bus service, which obviously we lost with TJ Walsh, but there are people wanting to make arrangements about colleges and schools in particular. Can you just expand a little bit more on that paragraph so that I might be able to inform constituents?
Yes, we are just finalising the outcome of tenders which we invited following the withdrawal of services that the TJ Walsh ran. TJ Walsh didn't run a bus directly from Keighley to Halifax. In fact, there hasn't been a direct link between the two towns for quite a few years, and we have at this committee in previous times discussed ways in which we might rebuild that link. One of the things which we put out to tender on was to seek to rejoin those two towns together with a bus link, and we're close to finalising that in terms of word of contract. And as soon as we've done that, then obviously we'll notify the members accordingly.
Councillor Salam.
Thanks, Chair. I think listening to everybody's comments regarding the bus working group, I think one of the things that we've got to take in consideration and think about is that this group will play a very vital role over the coming months and maybe over the coming years, because the way the COVID-19 has actually impacted on public transport and especially on buses. And I think the committee is aware of the funding is only till about end of July, just beginning of August. And then after that, what do we do? I know Dave said earlier on that we are carrying around 20 to 25% of our passengers that we normally carry. It's not even that percentage, it's even less than that, because we are only carrying about 19 on a double deck and about 10 on a single deck. So therefore, I think in terms of references, I think, it's vital that we get everything right on this one, because it's not just the impact on the members of public that are actually traveling on the buses, but also on the jobs that people actually rely on in this region. And there are many people that are actually, you know what I mean, worried about how the industry is going to pan out. I think, you know, we need to actually have this high on the agenda from my point of view, because if we're going to get this right, and you know, £3 million a month, right, is a lot of money, and sooner or later somebody's going to actually hold us accountable to that. So therefore, I think, but at the same time, one of the things that I would say is that I hope it doesn't impact on some of the less favorable routes, you know, that we don't just look at the main corridors, that we also look at where the bus services are needed, and we get this plan absolutely right. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Sam. I think you got to a very important point in terms of we're unable to increase our bus subsidy and maintain a balanced budget at the West Yorkshire Combined Authority. Councillor Swift?
Yeah, Taj has said most of what I would have meant to say. The only bit that I would say is in relation to attendance from individual districts. And I think that if we can't sort it out amongst ourselves to ensure that there is at least one member from our district in attendance at these meetings, I think it's a pretty poor show. I would have thought, I understand what Martin's saying, but I would have thought that we should be able to normally sort that kind of thing out between ourselves.
Thank you, Councillor Swift. Any more questions or comments? I'll just go to the chat to make sure. Are we happy to support the recommendations and take into consideration the comments that have been made today around the terms of reference, and send them back as quickly as possible to Transport Committee?
Sorry, can I just have some clarity, please, Kim? We seem to be countermanding the decision that we just made on item 5. If we're talking about revising the terms of condition for the bus working group, item 5, we established the bus working group and the terms of reference for the year ahead. If we're going to, I'd just like some clarity of it. Yeah, we seem to be immediately countermanding a decision we've already just made.
Dave, do you want to come in on that one?
Yes, I think what I had in mind is shortly after this meeting to basically take those terms of reference that have been approved in item 5 and set out how we will work with them over the ensuing period, and set that out in a working note, so that we can be absolutely clear as to how we're using that the local bus working group. It should be clear that obviously that's a subgroup of this committee. They established sort of delegated responsibilities both to the committee and at officer level aren't changed by this. This is really just a way of sharing with yourselves the emerging picture, the options available to us, and to engage with members across all of the committee in the way in which we can manage a situation. So I think what would be useful to do is I wasn't, and perhaps apologies if it appeared so, I wasn't necessarily rewriting those terms of reference on the next item of the agenda. What I was trying to do is set out a working arrangement that we can work with over the coming months.
Okay, so can we accept the recommendations, which are that the local bus working group oversees the reinstatement of the bus network and any commission of services, that the committee endorses the framework out of the transport recovery plan, that the committee approves alterations to the scope of the bus strategy and smart card and information programmes to facilitate elements of the transport recovery plan, that a delegated decision-making arrangements approved by the committee on the 13th of March be maintained to use on urgent matters relating to COVID-19, which I think we spelled out quite clearly, and reviewed at the next meeting. If anyone has got any comments and does not want to agree with those, can you put them in the chat now? I'm not seeing that, so thank you. So we will approve those recommendations. The next item is item 8. This is the Leeds City Region transport update. The purpose of the report for the Transport Committee is this report includes transport for the North meetings, our future mobility, fair deal for young people, the rail updates and the zero emission transport working group. So I am looking for questions and comments on this paper. Yes, Councillor Carhill. Councillor Carhill.
Thanks, Chair. Sorry, just trying to find my button to unmute myself behind my papers. It was on the zero emissions group, and obviously a lot of work's been done by that group and by officers to look at, and the consultants involved to look at the pathways that are available. One of the things it highlights there is that obviously public consultation on those plans is the next step, and that's obviously extremely important across the region and across the different districts in finding a way to do that in this difficult climate that allows a real meaningful conversation. So it does mention there the co-design of those, but really to allow effective co-production. We do have a lot of groups are very involved in this work, and obviously the separate districts have a lot of groups that they work with in order to further their plans on this. I just wondered whether, I don't know whether officers are able to give an answer now, but whether we can be provided with details of how we see that consultation working and how we can involve local groups in that to ensure that really those emissions work is co-produced with the community and we're able to take account of all the expertise around our areas in this work.
Thank you, Councillor Carhill, and I welcome the question. And we've obviously previously agreed the dates and unfortunately not been able to get out to consultation. I'm going to bring in our communications director in, Alan Rees.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Carlo. Yeah, we can circulate after this meeting the details for this. You're absolutely right. We want to get as much input as we possibly can. There are 2 stages. So there's going to, firstly, the work on the zero emissions pathways is going to be published for the combined authority at the end of this month. Following that, there will be a period of work with stakeholders across the region, and following that there'll then be full public consultation as we move into the autumn. So we are coming out of the first stage where there's lots of detailed analysis. We're now going into the next stage, which talks about the how do we go about creating a zero carbon city region, and we're looking for as much input as we possibly can get on that. But we'll circulate the details after this meeting of what's planned, and then see whether there are any groups that we have missed that colleagues would like to add to it.
Any more questions or comments on that item? Okay, so can I take it that the committee note the updates provided in this report? We are now on to summary of transport schemes. The purpose of the report is to inform the Transport Committee of the transport related approvals from the West Yorkshire Investment Committee. That took place on the 13th of May. Has anyone got any questions or comments on those schemes? Councillor Ball.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I've been asked to raise on behalf of the Home Firth traders, the shopkeepers, the issue on page 83. The situation in Home Firth is not as the report makes out, according to shopkeepers. There are a lot of objections to shopkeepers on these measures. They don't think it will help in resolving issues such as the turning movements. They say that they are losing the loading areas outside shops by it being on one side of the road only. They've not seen any traffic modelling to substantiate any beneficial impact. And apparently they're getting rid of a very well-respected indoor market albeit not very well used at the moment, and putting a pay and display car park there, which was at one time going to be part of a gyratory scheme. So just to pass on the views of those in the Home Valley and Home Firth, that all is not as it seems in this report. And as we've just talked about stakeholder engagement, I hope that as we go forward, we can ensure that we do get representation from all communities in our decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ball. I think what would be really useful in future, so that we can give you an answer, but I'm going to bring Councillor McBride in, is that if you've got any inquiries relating to any of the schemes, so that we can provide you with an update, that you could email those rather than bring them to the meeting, so that we can contact Councillor McBride, who just happens to be here today. So, Councillor McBride.
Thank you, Chair. This scheme, I've never seen as much consultation as there has been with this scheme. There is a very broad measure of consensus with regard to it. There was almost nearly unanimous view. Then in the final analysis, there was some significant caveats. But I don't think you could possibly have more engagement with the public than we've had over this scheme. And it's a relatively modest scheme. It's been modified at least 3 times by virtue of discussions with the public. This is a reasonable compromise, which the great majority, from my experience with it, which is substantial, the compromises which have been necessary, I think, have been totally undertaken and fulfilled. I think this is a very reasonable proposal, which does take into account the views of local people.
Thank you, Councillor McBride. Councillor Bolt, did you want to come back?
No.
I'm just checking the chat to see if we've got any more questions or comments. Okay. Any other business? Okay. The only thing that I've got to get agreement is that we write to, I think the leaders are suggesting to grant chaps again over the bus situation, and possibly the Prime Minister, because it's getting to such a critical state. So unless there's anyone against that, then we will proceed after this meeting to get some correspondence out today. It's so crucial. Okay, that is the end of the meeting. So I thank you for your time, everyone. I do apologise because that was my dog that was barking during the meeting. Yeah, everybody stay safe and well, and thank you for your attendance. Thank you.
Okay.
Bye, bye everyone. Bye. Bye.
See you, everybody. Stay safe.
Yeah, you too.
Bye.